I was a man of silence before the sun learned my name and after it forgot me. Dawn came pale and dust-colored, found me on the porch with a coffee cooling in my hands, then left me there like a fence post the wind had no use for. The ranch rose slow behind me, bleached boards and nail scars, a tired house that remembered other laughter than mine. I had 5 children inside those walls, 5 small souls moving through rooms that still smelled faintly of bread and wood smoke, and a woman I had buried on a winter morning I will not describe. Some grief is not for telling, only for carrying. I carried it like a water bucket with a cracked side, always leaking, never empty. The days laid themselves out in straight lines because I made them so. Cattle needed feed. Fences bowed in the wind and had to be stood up again. A gelding, with a full heart, kept testing the gate, and I kept reminding him the world outside had teeth. Boys learned to ride. The little girl learned to tie a ribbon, and I learned to keep my voice kind and short. Work was my prayer, and it answered as work always does, by giving me another thing to hold when the nights came. I slept light. A man does when there are children to mind and coyotes that sing too close. But it was not coyotes that kept my eyes open. It was the chair by the hearth where no one sat. It was the way the lamp threw a second shadow on the floor. And some nights I knew that shadow. Other nights I did not. I would stand at the doorway and count the breaths of each child. And then I would go outside because the stars were honest, even when they were cruel. Folks in town would tip their hats and step aside when I walked down the boards. They knew 2 things about me. 1, I did not drink with men who talked louder than their debts. 2, I did not leave a bill on a counter unpaid. That builds a kind of quiet around a man. The grocer tallied my flour and salt. The blacksmith watched my horses like I was a hymn he could not sing. The preacher nodded and did not try to change my mind about Sundays. He said God has as many doors as there are men who think they stand outside. I said I would knock later. I don't like to talk about money. It is a clean language when it is earned with your hands, and a dirty one when it is earned with somebody else's shame. I have spoken both dialects. The day that concerns this telling began with a wind that smelled of gypsum and stale water. I rode in to buy nails and a sack of coffee beans. The boys needed new bootlaces. The girl had asked for a ribbon the color of sky right before dusk. I told her I would see what the mercantile had. By noon, the street ran a thin stream of heat. A dog lay under the hitch rail and dreamed of rabbits too slow to live. The saloon doors moved now and again for a thirst that could write its own obituary. I tied my mare and tipped my hat to Miss Abel, who kept the store since her brother took sick. She had a ledger for everything a person could want, and a face that never forgot what you had promised the month before. They were speaking soft in the back room, the sort of soft that carries the way a rattler's whisper does. I did not mean to listen. I did not mean not to. Not. I was counting nails and measuring ribbon in my head when the door opened and a man came out with a paper in his fist and the look of someone who had decided to be mean because it was easier than being poor. Behind him stood a girl. No, a woman. I will call her a girl only once, to mark the place where she stopped being one. Her dress was neat in the way of someone who keeps clean to remember they are still a person. She looked at the floor, and then at the ceiling, then at nothing at all. I have seen horses with that look, straight and emptied out, waiting to be told which way pain will take them. The man lifted the paper like it explained everything. He said he had a contract. He said the woman was barren, and therefore of no use to a household that needed heirs. He said he would be glad to be rid of her for a fair price, less than a mule, if a man did not want the bother of a temper. I stood the way I do, when a storm has not yet chosen its fence line. Miss Abel folded her hands and said there were some trades a Christian shop could not bless. The man laughed and said the blessing was not required, only the coin. Someone on the street paused. The dog woke and put his head back down. The wind found its memory and rattled the single pane in the back window. I am no judge in a court. I am not a sheriff. I am a rancher who has failed and begun again enough times to know the shape of a near mistake. I looked at the woman. She was the kind who had learned, too young, to take the room's temperature before she spoke. She did not look back long. Her eyes met mine for a breath and then moved on, like a bird that has learned to fly past a snare without slowing. The man with the paper turned toward me like I had raised a bid. He named a number. I let it pass by me. He named another and added a story to make it seem smaller. I did not answer. I was listening for something else. Some old hinge in me that had creaked a long time and now might move. In the corner of my mind, I saw the chair by the hearth and the lamp that drew two shadows. I saw a ribbon I had promised to buy, and a little girl who put her hope where it did not break anything if it fell. I asked the woman her name. The man answered for her. I told him I was not speaking to him. The woman raised her head then, just enough to say the syllables like a prayer she had lost the habit of. The name fit the room better than he did. I thought about all the ways a person gets lost, and all the harder ways they are found. I will not repeat what I said to the man. I will say only that some words have a way of landing and staying put. He folded his paper. He measured me and found I was not worth the trouble that day. He left, and the door took its time closing behind him, as if it was ashamed to have let him through so easy. The woman stood without a wall to lean her worry against. Miss Abel gave her a glass of water. I gave her my silence, which is the only respectable thing a stranger can offer when another stranger has been used like a broom. She drank slow. Her hands did not shake. Her mouth was set in that hopeless way people adopt when hope has tricked them too often. I told her I had a ranch that needed a steady person and a house that needed a steady heart. I told her I had 5 children who could use a voice soft enough to teach and firm enough to be believed. I did not say wife. I did not say mother. I said there was a room at my place that the wind did not reach, and that a good lamp will make any table feel like a church if you sit close to it and tell the truth. She asked me what truth I planned to tell. I said I was a tired man who did not want to be cruel by accident anymore. I said I did not need anything from her that her body could not give. I said I could pay wages, or I could offer a quiet house and a name and space enough for a woman to keep her own dignity in. I said there were people in the world who measured worth by seed and cradle. I said my measure was different now, since the winter. She did not ask about the winter, and I did not offer it. Miss Abel watched us the way a woman watches a road she has walked a long time. The clock above her head counted a minute I will remember longer than it deserves. The woman put the glass down. She said she would come for a week. She said she would earn whatever roof she slept under. She said if I ever called her Barren again, even once, she would walk away in the night and take with her whatever small goodness she might have given. I told her that seemed like a fair contract, seeing as how it was written in a better ink than his paper used. I bought the ribbon. It was the exact color the sky keeps in its pocket for evenings that do not intend to hurt you. We stepped into the heat together. I held the mare while she found her seat in the saddle. She rode like a person who had learned balance by standing still too long. Out beyond the last hitch rail, the land opened and showed us what kind of day it had been all along. We did not speak much. You learn a person's weight by the way silence sits between you. Hers sat steady. Mine stopped shifting for the first time in years. When the ranch rose ahead, the house did not change shape. It was still tired boards and nail scars. But the wind lay down a little, and I heard the small voices inside like a promise the world was deciding to keep. The road home ran west, same as every road worth remembering. The afternoon light leaned heavy, that yellow kind of tired you only see where the grass burns low and the sky forgets to rain. I rode slow. She rode slower. I could hear the creak of her saddle leather behind me, steady and careful like someone afraid to wake a dream. The horse I gave her was gentle, an old mare that understood secrets. Every hoof step sounded like a word we didn't yet know how to say. I thought of the children. 5 of them, scattered through that big old house like prayers tossed to different corners of a church. The oldest boy, Eli, near 12, had taken to breaking silence with too much pride. The twins, wild as deer, spent their days racing the wind and spitting truth when it suited them. The little girl, Mary, still asked about her mother sometimes, and the youngest, Sam, didn't remember her at all, though sometimes I'd catch him staring at the chair by the hearth like a man twice his years. We crested a ridge, and there she was again, the house, small in the wide breadth of land, chimney leaning like a man who meant to stay humble. I wondered what she saw when she looked at it. To me it was a skeleton wrapped in memories, bones too stubborn to lie down. To her, maybe just shelter, maybe a test. When we rode into the yard, the dogs barked once, and then stopped, uncertain who this new figure was. The door opened and 5 pairs of eyes spilled out, sharp and quiet. Children always know before you speak. They watched her dismount, her boots touching the dirt like she was asking permission to stand. I'd said, "This here's Miss Lila. She'll be helping out some." Eli nodded polite, the kind of politeness that means he's already decided to judge later. The twins looked at each other and then at her, like she was a puzzle the preacher hadn't solved yet. Mary stepped forward and whispered something I couldn't catch. Lila smiled small, just one corner of her mouth, and said, "That's a pretty ribbon you've got there." Mary looked down at her hair, where the old ribbon frayed near the knot. She reached out and touched the parcel in Lila's hand. "That one for me?" she asked. Lila said, "Maybe. We'll see how supper goes." That was the first time the house heard laughter again. A tiny sound, not sure it belonged there. Inside the room smelled of pine smoke and soap. Lila set her bag down by the wall and looked around slow, tracing the shelves, the window, the floorboards that spoke when stepped on. She moved like someone who had learned not to claim space until she earned it. I showed her the kitchen, the water pump out back, the small room off the hallway where she could stay. She nodded after each word like a student memorizing her way through a new kind of life. That evening, the wind came up mean, shaking the shutters. We ate stew, bread hard enough to prove the world hadn't turned soft. Lila said little, the children said less. I watched her hands, how she held the spoon gentle, how she passed the bowl to Sam first. When supper ended, she washed the dishes while I stoked the fire. Mary sat close to her, whispering stories I didn't hear. For the first time in a long time, the sound of a woman's voice in that room didn't feel like a memory trying to come back. It felt like something that might stay. After the children went to bed, I stepped outside. The moon was half bitten, clouds dragging across it like cattle through dust. Lila came to the door, but didn't cross it. "It's quiet here, my house, she said. I answered. "Takes a while to learn what kind of quiet it is." She folded her arms. "I've known two kinds. The one people give you to punish, and the one you choose when words ain't safe. This one feels different." I said, maybe it's waiting to be shared." She looked past me, out toward the pasture. "That field," she said, "looks lonely." I told her, "It's got company. The stars don't talk much, but they listen." She almost smiled. "Then maybe they'll listen to me." I didn't know then that she meant it. I didn't know she would walk that field at night sometimes, talking low to no one, letting the wind carry what she couldn't tell me yet. Days turned into a rhythm you could set a clock to. She rose before the dawn, bellied up over the ridge, milked the goats, packed lunches for the children. The twins tested her, as boys do when they smell gentleness. She handled them the way a good horse handles a nervous rider, firm, patient, unafraid. Eli watched her with suspicion at first, then with something like respect. Mary followed her everywhere. Sam laughed again, the sound small and shy, but real. At night, I would see Lila through the kitchen doorway, her hair undone, head bent over some sewing. The lamplight softened the lines the years had drawn on her face. I'd catch myself thinking she looked like peace might, if it ever decided to take human form. Then I'd remember the promise I'd made, to ask nothing of her but presence, and I'd turn away. Some vows are meant to keep a man honest. One evening, maybe 2 weeks after she came, a storm gathered from the west. The sky went the color of wet clay. The cattle grew restless, and the twins were still out by the creek. I saddled up, but Lila was already at the barn, pulling her shawl tight. "They'll be scared, she said. "I'll come with you." We rode hard through wind that slapped grit into our teeth. Lightning cut the hills open. We found the boys huddled under the fallen trunk of an old cottonwood, shivering and proud all at once. Lila slid off her horse before I could say a word, covered them with her shawl, scolded and comforted in the same breath. When we got back, soaked to the bone, she built a fire so fierce the rain seemed to bow to it. She dried each child's hair, sang something soft that might have been a lullaby from another life. That night, when I walked past her door, the house smelled of wet earth and hope. I paused, listening to the rhythm of her breathing beyond the wall. I wanted to thank her, but words felt too small. So I went to the porch and left a cup of coffee on the railing, still warm from the pot. It was morning before I found the cup empty. No note, no mention, just a quiet agreement signed in steam. After that, each night, I left the cup there. Some mornings it was full. Some mornings it was empty. I never asked why. You don't question small mercies. You just let them keep you alive a little longer. The summer settled in with a kind of lazy mercy, hot enough to slow a man's anger, but not so cruel that it broke him. The land took on that pale gold look, the one that hides hunger under beauty. Lila moved through it like she'd been born knowing its moods. She'd fetch water with her sleeves rolled, skin browned by the sun, and I'd watch from the corral pretending I was checking tack. Truth was, I liked the sound of her voice drifting through the air while she talked to Mary or sang to the goats. It filled the emptiness the wind used to own. She had a way of mending things without fuss, a torn sleeve, a splintered chair, a child's pride. I started to see the house change. Less dust on the sills, fewer ghosts in the corners. Even the dogs lay easier in the shade, tails thumping when she passed. The boys tried to impress her. Eli learned to patch a saddle without complaint. The twins started saying yes, ma'am, like it was their own idea. Sam followed her everywhere, his little hand tugging at her skirt, and she never pulled away. One evening, I came in late from driving a few stray cattle. My bones ached the way old wood creaks in wind. The kitchen smelled of stew and bread, and the lamplight turned the room to amber. Lila sat sewing near the fire, head bowed. Mary slept on her lap. I stopped in the doorway, not wanting to break whatever peace had found us. She looked up and smiled, small, almost shy. I tipped my hat, muttered something about the herd, but the truth was, I was just grateful to come home to that sight. We lived that way for a while. Quiet, steady, careful. The town forgot about us mostly. That suited me fine. Folks whisper when they don't understand a thing, but whispers die quick out here where wind and work drown them. I went about my business, trading beef and salt, keeping my temper short and my debts shorter. Lila never asked about my late wife. I never asked about her past. Some questions are best left to die of thirst. Then came the day Sam fell sick. It was near harvest, when the dust runs thick and the nights turn colder than you expect. He started coughing one evening, just a small sound at first. By dawn, his breath was shallow and hot as the stove. The doctor was 2 towns over, and the road had washed out from a storm. I saddled the horse anyway, but Lila caught my arm. "You won't make it in time," she said, her voice calm as a prayer that's already been answered. "Let me stay with him." I wanted to argue, to do something with my hands besides worry, but her eyes stopped me. I'd seen fear before, but hers wasn't that. It was resolve, hard and sure as a mountain. "I know fevers," she said. "I know how to talk them down." She sat by his bed all night, wiping his brow, humming the same tune she'd sung in the barn that first storm. I sat on the porch, useless, listening to her voice carry through the boards. Every hour I'd walk to the doorway and look in, afraid to ask, afraid to hope. Toward dawn she looked up and met my eyes. "He's sleeping," she whispered. "He's through it." I don't remember crossing the room. I only remember kneeling beside the bed, hearing the boy's small breath, steady now, and something breaking loose in my chest. I turned to thank her, but she'd fallen asleep in the chair, head tilted, hand still resting near his heart. The lamp flickered low, and the room smelled of cedar and sweat and salvation. When morning came, she woke and went about her chores as if nothing had happened. I found the coffee pot half full on the stove. I poured 2 cups, brought one to the porch rail. She joined me without a word. The sun climbed, red and slow. She took a sip, looked out at the pasture. "You've got good land here," she said. I nodded. "It's better since you came." She didn't look at me, but her hand brushed mine when she set the cup down. It was a small touch, a spark under all that morning calm. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself. It just stands quietly beside you until you notice you're breathing easier. After that day, the rhythm changed. She laughed more. The children started calling her Miss Lila less and Mama more. Eli still hesitated over the word, but even he softened when she patched his hand after he cut it on the wire fence. I caught her once humming by the window, eyes half closed, light painting her face like forgiveness. That sound did something to me I can't rightly name. It was the first time I realized I wasn't just grateful anymore. I was alive again. One night, late, I woke to the sound of the back door. I found her outside, sitting on the steps, moonlight turning her hair silver. She said she couldn't sleep. I sat beside her. The silence between us felt comfortable, like two saddles that had finally learned each other's shape. After a long while, she said, "You ever think God gives second chances?" I said, "Nah, out here he gives weather. What we make of it, that's on us." She smiled faintly. Maybe that's the same thing. We sat there till the sky bled pale. When she stood to go in, she looked down at me and said, "You keep leaving that coffee out for me. You trying to start a habit?" I said maybe I already did. She shook her head, smiling for real this time, and went inside. I stayed on the porch until the first rooster crowed. The cup she left beside me was empty, steam gone, but the warmth stayed in my hands long after. Autumn crept in soft, like a secret trying not to startle the world. The mornings came cooler, the sky bluer than it had any right to be. The cottonwoods along the creek turned gold and whispered like old friends telling news they didn't quite believe. I'd ride the fence line at dawn, and from the ridge I could see smoke curling from the chimney, thin and patient. That was Lila's doing. She rose before anyone, lit the stove, set coffee to percolate slow. Sometimes I'd stop halfway down the slope just to watch that smoke rise. A man can fall in love with the sight of his own home if he's been lost long enough. The ranch changed with the season. We brought in the herd, fixed what summer had broken. The boys grew stronger. Eli took charge without me asking. He had his mother's steady hand, though he didn't know it. Lila let him lead, but she never let him forget kindness. I'd see her touch his shoulder when his tone got sharp with the twins. That single touch would soften him faster than a sermon. The twins still tested every rule, but they laughed more than they lied now. Mary followed Lila everywhere, and Sam, well, Sam loved her like the sunrise itself. One evening after the herd was counted and the sky bled purple, Lila came out to the corral where I was mending a gate. She carried a tin cub and 2 biscuits wrapped in a cloth. "You'll forget to eat," she said. I smiled, took one. The coffee in her cup steamed between us, and I swear it smelled like forgiveness. She leaned on the rail beside me. The horses snorted, restless in the cooling air. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Leaving?" I said. "In this place?" "This life," she answered. The dust, the long days, the quiet that sometimes feels too wide." I looked at her. "I used to," I said. But now the quiet sounds different." She didn't speak for a moment. The wind lifted her hair, brushed it across her cheek, and she didn't move it away. Different how? Like it's listening, I said. She turned to face the horizon. When I was younger, she said softly, I thought the world had decided what I was worth. My family believed the same. I let them. I thought if I stayed silent long enough, the shame would fade. But silence doesn't fade. It grows teeth. I kept my eyes on the fence post, giving her room to speak. They told me I couldn't give life, she went on, but you. She stopped. You never asked me to prove anything. I know what it feels like to bury proof, I said. You learn to stop counting blessings and start recognizing them. Her eyes met mine then, steady and bright in the twilight. There was no romance in that look. Not yet. Just recognition. Two people who had run out of pretending. She nodded once, as if to seal some wordless agreement, then walked back toward the house. The dogs followed her halfway, and then returned to me, tails low, waiting for my next command. I didn't have one. I just watched her until the door closed, and the light behind it flickered warm. Days turned slower after that. Maybe it was the season. Maybe it was the way we both started listening for footsteps that weren't our own. I'd find her humming in the kitchen, and sometimes I'd join in, low and rough. The tune didn't matter. What mattered was the sound of it filling space once empty. One afternoon, the preacher rode up. He hadn't been by since the funeral years back. Said he was making rounds before winter, seeing who might need supplies or prayer. He stayed for supper. Lila set an extra plate without being asked. The preacher watched her quiet efficiency, the way she spoke gentle to each child. When the meal was done, he turned to me and said, "You've found peace, Jack." I didn't know how to answer. He smiled. Sometimes peace comes wearing an apron. After he left, I found Lila out back, gathering kindling. "Preacher's a good man," she said, "but he talks too plain." "Plain talk's better than guessing," I said. She gave a soft laugh. "You think so? Then why do you say so little?" I paused, because too many words can ruin the truth. She tilted her head. "And what's the truth tonight?" I said. "Matt's supper tasted like home." The moon was rising, pale as bone. She looked up at it and whispered then, "Maybe we're halfway to being a family." She walked past me toward the porch, the lantern swinging from her hand. The light brushed the edge of my boots and moved on. That night, I left the coffee on the rail again. When I stepped out before dawn, it was gone, as always. But this time, there was a small scrap of cloth beside it. The ribbon I'd bought months ago, tied in a loose knot. It had been smoothed and retied, the color deeper now from use. I held it in my hand, and for the first time in years, I prayed. Not to ask for anything, just to say thank you for what had already been given. Winter came early that year, sharp and quiet, the kind that doesn't ask permission before it stays. Frost laid its hand on the windows each morning, and the sound of boots on the porch turned hollow. The days were short, the nights long enough to make a man count what mattered. For me, that list had changed. It was no longer made of cattle and debts and the shape of fences. It was made of laughter by the fire, the smell of bread baking, and the warmth of a woman's voice, humming low enough to steady a restless soul. Lila handled the cold like she'd been born in it. She'd wrap her shawl around her shoulders, cheeks red, eyes bright. She kept the stove going, mended clothes till her fingers bled. The children clung to her like she'd been there all their lives. Even Eli softened, calling her Ma one morning without meaning to. I saw the way she froze for a second, then smiled so small it might have broken a heart less used to mending. I said nothing, just watched from the doorway. Coffee warm in my hands and something heavier warm in my chest. There are moments you don't name while they happen. They slip past, too fragile for words, but later, when you sit alone and the night creaks around you, those moments come back clearer than any photograph. The night Eli called her Ma was one of those. The other was the morning I found her out by the barn, standing still, face turned to the snow. It had been falling all night, soft as breath, and the world looked washed clean. She said, I used to be afraid of mornings like this, too white, too quiet, like God wanted me to start over, whether I was ready or not. I asked if she was ready now. She said, well, maybe, but starting over's not something you do alone. That stayed with me. Later that week, we had company. Her father. He came up the road on a mule, hunched against the cold, carrying the same look as the day I met him. Pride wrapped in need. The children stopped playing when they saw him. Lila was at the window, her hand still on the dough she'd been kneading. She went pale, not from fear exactly, but from the kind of dread that comes from remembering how people can own your name. I told the boys to stay inside. I stepped out to meet him. He greeted me with a nod too short to be honest. You the man who took her in, he said. I am, I told him. He looked past me toward the door. You know she owes me. I paid to raise her, feed her, clothe her. A father deserves something for that. The snow cracked under my boots when I moved closer. She doesn't owe you a thing, I said, not anymore. He laughed then, a dry, mean sound. She can't give you sons. You'll learn that soon enough. She's worth less than the ground you're standing on. I didn't raise my voice. Out here shouting means you've already lost. I said I've buried the only woman I ever swore before God to love. I've watched her children cry for something the world couldn't give back. Don't you talk to me about worth. He stared at me a long moment, maybe trying to decide if my silence was weakness or warning. Then he spit in the snow and turned his mule around. You'll regret it, he said. A barren woman's curse is to make a man small. I didn't answer. I waited till his shape disappeared down the ridge. When I turned back, Lila was standing in the doorway. She had flour on her hands and tears on her cheeks, though she didn't wipe them. He'll talk, she said quietly. Let him, I told her. The wind's got better stories to carry. That night, the house sat heavy with quiet. The children felt it, though they didn't know why. After they were asleep, I found her sitting by the fire, staring at the flames like they were telling her something she couldn't quite hear. I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. He can't hurt you here, I said. She nodded, still looking at the fire. It's not him I'm afraid of, she said. It's the part of me that still believes him. I wanted to tell her everything I felt, that she had become the pulse of this place, that her laughter had turned the house from a shelter into a home, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached for the ribbon she had left weeks ago, pulled it from my coat pocket, and handed it to her. Seems this belongs with you, I said. She looked down at it, fingers trembling. Why'd you keep it? Because it reminded me there's color left in the world, I said, and because I wasn't ready to give it back until now. She turned the ribbon over once, twice, then tied it in her hair. The firelight caught the fabric, glowing red against the brown. "Thank you," she whispered, "and for letting me stay." "Lila," I said, "you're not staying. You're home." She didn't answer. She leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat that way till the fire burned low and the first hint of dawn pressed against the window. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world felt clean again. The thaw came slow, as if winter didn't trust the world to behave without its hand on the door. Streams began to whisper again, and the air smelled faintly of sage and wet dirt. The cattle moved easy, glad to feel the grass under their hooves. Life began to stretch its back. Inside the house, laughter returned with the same shy grace. The children shed their coats, and the walls remembered what warmth sounded like. Lila hummed more often now, sometimes old songs I didn't know, sometimes just little tunes that filled the gaps between chores. I'd hear her in the kitchen and find myself smiling without reason. A man can get used to peace if he doesn't question it too much. But peace never lasts long out here. Not because of storms or droughts, though those come easy, but because people remember what they'd rather forget. Word got around about Lila's father and his visit. In towns like ours, gossip spreads quicker than wildfire in dry grass. By spring, every tongue between the church and the saloon had something to say about the woman living on my ranch. "Bought her cheap," some whispered. "Pity he can't do better," said others. And always the word barren said, like a curse, soft but sharp enough to cut. The first time I heard it was at the general store. I'd come in for salt blocks and a new plow handle. 2 men stood by the counter, laughing quiet, until they noticed me. One tipped his hat, eyes sliding away too slow. The other said, "Heard you've taken in a stray." I set the sack of flour down and said, "Must have heard wrong. I took in a woman." They chuckled. "That what you call her?" I looked at them both, calm as Sunday. "That's what she is." They didn't laugh again. I paid and left, but anger sat in me like a stone. When I got home, Lila was out back hanging sheets in the wind. They billowed white against the blue sky, a sight so clean it made the world's talk seem smaller than dust. She saw my face and said, "They're talking, aren't they?" "They always do," I said. "I don't care what they think of me," she said, "but I care what it does to you." I shook my head. A man's got to stand where he stands. They can't move me with words. Her eyes softened. "That's not true. Words move everything, even if you don't see it happen." That night, the silence between us was different. Not heavy, but full, like the air before rain. After the children were asleep, I found her on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the dark. "I used to think shame was the thing you could outrun," she said, "but it follows, quiet, till you stop to rest." I said, "Well, then we'll keep walking, together." She turned to me, eyes glinting like wet stone. "You really mean that?" "I do." She reached up then, brushed her hand against my jaw. It was the first time she'd touched me without reason. My breath caught. "You don't have to fix what they broke," I whispered. "I'm not," she said. "I'm trying to believe it's already mended." After that, something shifted. The lines we'd both drawn in the dust started to fade. The mornings grew easier. She began riding with me to check the fence line, her skirt tied up for the saddle, her laughter mixing with the wind. I'd show her the hidden places, the stream that never dried, the ridge where the grass stayed green even in drought. She listened, eyes wide, as if the land itself was teaching her to breathe again. One afternoon, we stopped near a patch of wildflowers, blooming where the snow melt ran. She slid off her horse and knelt, touching the petals with fingers that trembled just a little. They grow in the coldest soil, she said. Maybe that's the trick of living. Maybe it is, I said. Survive long enough to bloom where no one expects you to. She smiled at that, a small, knowing smile. You ever think we're like that? Two things that shouldn't have made it this far? I nodded. Every day. The wind carried her laughter away, soft and bright. For the first time, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull back. The world seemed to hush, even the horses stilling as if afraid to break the moment. We stood like that until the sun leaned west and the shadows stretched long enough to touch home. That night, at supper, Eli asked if Miss Lila was going to stay forever. The twins snickered, and Mary told them to hush. Lila glanced at me, waiting. I said, she's already been here forever, far as I can tell. The children laughed. Lila didn't. She looked at me, steady, then smiled so gently it felt like the first warm day of spring. Later, when the house had gone still, she found me on the porch. You shouldn't have said that, she whispered to me. Why not? Because I wanted to be the one to say it first. We both laughed, soft and slow. I wanted to tell her I'd been waiting all winter for that kind of laughter. Instead, I just took her hand again. She let me. The stars came out over the ridge, scattered and bright. The world felt wide, but not lonely anymore. Spring leaned into summer with the quiet certainty of a hand on your shoulder. The land stretched open, green and humming with heat. Days turned long and full, nights soft with the smell of sage. Work followed the sun, branding calves, mending fences, tending the garden Lila had planted near the well. She coaxed life out of the dirt the way some folks coax a tune from a fiddle, gentle, sure, patient. The children helped, barefoot and loud, chasing the chickens till she shooed them off with a laugh. I'd watch from the field and think how strange it was that peace could sneak up on a man who never thought he deserved it. The town didn't change, though. Gossip has deep roots, and by mid-June it had grown wild. I could feel it when I rode in for supplies, the sideways looks, the whispered talk. Lila came with me once, against my better sense. She wanted to buy cloth for new curtains and a birthday gift for Mary. When we walked down Main Street, folks pretended to nod polite, but their eyes said other things. A woman I'd known for years crossed to the other side rather than pass near us. Lila kept her chin up, face calm, but I saw her fingers twist the edge of her shawl. Inside the mercantile, Miss Abel met us with her usual steady kindness. Good to see you both, she said loud enough for anyone listening to hear. I nodded to her, grateful. Lila picked a bolt of yellow cloth, pale and bright like sunlight caught in fabric. For the kitchen windows, she said, maybe it'll keep the morning kinder. I smiled, but when we turned to leave, a man near the door spat and muttered, should have left her where she was bought. I stopped. The room went still. Lila's hand touched my arm, light, but it held me better than any rope. Jack, she whispered, oh, don't. I looked at her, saw the plea in her eyes, and turned away. And we walked out into the sunlight, the dust bright around our boots. She didn't speak till we reached the horses. "You can't fight them all," she said. "I don't mean to," I told her, "but I won't let them name you." She looked at me then, a long, level look that carried more strength than anger ever could. "They already did once," she said. "What matters is what you call me now." I said, "Oh, home." That night, the house was quiet. The children had gone to bed early after a long day in the fields. Lila sat by the window, mending a shirt of mine, her needle flashing in the lamplight. I poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her. She took it, eyes tired but soft. "You ever wonder," she asked, "what people would say if they saw us as we really are?" "I don't think they'd believe it," I said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the trouble. They'd rather believe a lie than a mercy." She set the cup down, hands resting in her lap. "I spent years thinking my life ended the day my father sold me, that nothing after would matter. But now—" She paused, searching for the words. Now I wake up, and the first thing I hear is laughter. The last thing I see before sleep is light. That can't be nothing." I said, "It ain't. It's everything." Outside, thunder rolled distant, a low growl crawling over the hills. She glanced toward the window. "Storm's coming," she said. "Let it," I answered. "We're built to stand through worse." The rain arrived before midnight, heavy, steady, washing the dust from the air. I checked the barn, tightened the shutters, then came back soaked. She met me at the door with a towel, scolding under her breath. I laughed, and she swatted at my arm, but her eyes were smiling. When I reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. "You don't have to thank me for everything," she said. "I ain't thanking you," I said. "I'm just remembering you're real." The power of that moment wasn't in the touch, but in the quiet afterward. The storm outside matched the one that had lived in both of us too long. When I finally leaned closer, she didn't move. She just closed her eyes and breathed, slow and steady, as if the world had finally stopped asking her to run. The next morning, the ranch smelled of wet earth and wild mint. The children burst through the door barefoot, shouting about puddles. Lila stood at the threshold, hair undone, sunlight catching on her face. She turned to me and said, "You should see the field. It's blooming already." I looked past her, saw the land shining with green. "Seems everything grows easier with you here," I said. She laughed. "Even the weeds." "Especially the weeds," I said. "They finally got someone worth blooming for." We spent that day fixing the fence by the south pasture, the air heavy with the smell of rain. At noon, we sat under the cottonwood, sharing bread and salt pork. She leaned against me, quiet, content. I thought then that maybe heaven wasn't a place you go after dying. Maybe it was a stretch of prairie where the wind hums low, and the person beside you doesn't flinch from your shadow. Toward evening, a rider came down the trail. The preacher again, dust on his coat and purpose in his eyes. He dismounted slow, looked at us both, and said, "Town's been talking rough. You might want to come in on Sunday. Let folks see what kind of truth walks together." I said I'd think on it. After he rode off, Lila looked at me, half smiling. "You ever step inside that church again, Jack?" "Not since the funeral," I said. "Then maybe it's time," she whispered. That night, I left the coffee on the rail like always, Before dawn, I found 2 cups instead of 1. Hers beside mine, both empty, both warm. No words left, no note, just 2 quiet proofs that some storms wash more than they ruin. Sunday came on with a sky clear enough to make a man believe again. The children scrubbed up, boots polished, hair slicked with a care that didn't last long. Lila braided Mary's curls, tied them with that yellow ribbon she'd sewn into new curtains. She looked at me when she finished, a question in her eyes that needed no words. "We'll go," I said. "It's time." The church sat at the end of Main Street, whitewashed, leaning a little from years of wind and repentance. Folks gathered slow, like cattle, uneasy before a branding. When we rode in, the noise dropped quiet enough to hear the creak of saddle leather. Eli helped the little ones down. Lila took Mary's hand. I could feel every eye in town marking each step we took. Inside, the air was warm with dust and hymn. The preacher met us at the door, shook my hand firm. "Good to have you here, Jack," he said loud, so the back pew could hear. "Good to see your family." I saw Lila's shoulders ease just a little at that word. We took a seat near the front. The children fidgeted. Lila bowed her head. I kept mine up, not in pride, but to face whatever waited. The sermon was about forgiveness. I can't recall the words, only the tone, gentle, like a man trying to remind a room full of ghosts that they could rest if they wanted. When the final hymn began, Lila's voice joined softly, unsure at first, then stronger. It filled the space around me like a warm wind. I thought about all the Sundays I'd spent avoiding this sound, afraid it would stir what grief had buried. But it didn't hurt this time. It healed. When the service ended, folks filed past us. Some nodded. Some pretended to fix their gloves, but a few smiled. Real smiles. The kind that mean they've seen more than rumor. Miss Abel came first, pressing Lila's hands between hers. "You've done right by this town, dear," she said. "Don't you let anyone tell you different." Lila thanked her, voice trembling. Then the rest of them drifted out into the sun, talk rising like bees in a field. Outside, the preacher stopped me. "You mind if I say something plain?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." He nodded toward Lila, who was helping Mary up onto the wagon. "Some folks still think a woman's worth comes from the children she bears. You and I both know better. But sometimes truth needs to be spoken where lies have grown." "I'll speak it when it's time," I said. He clapped my shoulder. "Good. The Lord may work in silence, but men listen louder." The ride home was quiet. The children dozed, heads bumping together. The road shimmered with heat, cicadas singing their one-note hymn. Lila sat beside me, hands folded in her lap. After a while she said, "I kept waiting for someone to call me what they used to. They didn't." "They will again," I said, "but next time they'll have to say it where I can hear." She looked at me, half smiling. "You'd fight the whole town for my name?" "Wouldn't have to," I said. They'll see it's already taken." Back at the ranch, the day settled into calm. The children ran wild through the tall grass, their laughter chasing away the last chill of winter. Lila stood on the porch, eyes half closed, letting the wind lift her hair. I came up beside her. "You think it'll ever stop mattering what they say?" I asked. "It already does," and she said, "They don't know the kind of quiet we built here." That evening, after supper, we sat by the fire. She read to the children from a book Miss Abel had given her, A story about a bird that lost its wings but learned to sing anyway. When she finished, Sam climbed into her lap and fell asleep before she could set the book down. The twins leaned against her knees, and even Eli stayed close. I watched them all, the lamplight soft on their faces, and thought that maybe grace was just another word for coming home, tired and finding warmth waiting. When the children were in bed, I stayed by the hearth. The fire had burned low. Layla lingered by the table, gathering the cups. I said, "You could leave, you know. Start fresh somewhere new. No one would follow." She turned slowly, eyes steady. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," I said, "but you should know you could." She set the cups down. "I don't want freedom if it means losing what I've found." Her voice shook a little. "This house, these children, you gave me a name no one can take." I stood then, crossed the room, took her hand. "What name's that?" She smiled through tears. "Mine." I don't know how long we stood there. The fire cracked. The wind whispered against the eaves, and the world felt still enough to remember us. Later, when she finally went to her room, I stepped outside. The stars hung low and wide, the same ones I'd cursed through lonely nights. Now they looked almost gentle. I set a cup of coffee on the porch rail, out of habit. After a moment's thought, I set a second beside it. This time, I stayed long enough to see her hand reach through the doorway and take one. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The heat came early that year. The air turned thick and slow, dust rising in little ghosts behind every hoof print. The cattle bawled lazy in the fields, too hot to argue. Even the wind forgot to move. We rose before sunrise, finished what work we could before the light turned white and hard. The rest of the day belonged to shade and silence. Lila kept a pitcher of well water near the door, cool as mercy, and the children spent afternoons under the porch steps, whispering secrets to the barn cats. Those were the long, golden days, the kind that slip away before you realize they've started. I remember her standing by the fence, apron caught in the breeze, hair unbound, watching the horizon as if she could read tomorrow in the shimmer. I'd come up behind her, touch her shoulder, and she'd lean into that touch just enough to remind me it was real. There wasn't much talk between us anymore. We didn't need it. Words were for people still trying to explain themselves. We were past explaining, but peace has its price. Late one evening, a rider came, dusted from the road, hat pulled low. He stopped by the gate, asked if I was Jack Holden. I said I was. He handed me an envelope, thin and creased. "From the county clerk," he said. "Some business from town." I took it, nodded, watched him ride off into the fading light. Inside was a notice, petition for payment of an outstanding debt, signed by Lila's father. He claimed I'd taken his property without due compensation. Property. That word burned through the page like acid. I read it twice, slow, just to make sure I understood the kind of cruelty a man could still think legal. Lila was at the table, mending Sam's overalls. When she saw my face, she froze. "What is it?" I handed her the paper. She read it, silent, then folded it once, twice, until it was no bigger than her palm. "He won't stop," she said, "not until he makes me small again." I sat across from her, the lamplight flickering between us. "You want me to go to town? Settle it?" She shook her head. "If you do, he'll win. He'll make you part of his story. I'd rather we tell our own." Still by morning, I knew what had to be done. I saddled the horse before dawn. Lila came out onto the porch, hair still unbraided, the sky behind her gray with the promise of heat. "You don't have to," she said. "I do," I told her. "Some things a man answers himself." She stepped closer, laid her hand on my chest, then promised me one thing: come back calm. "I'll come back," I said. Town was already awake when I arrived. I tied my horse outside the courthouse, walked in, and laid the paper on the clerk's desk. He looked nervous, fumbling with his spectacles. "It's legitimate far as the law reads," he said. "You could contest it, but nothing," I said. "There's no law worth a damn that calls a woman property." I took the paper, tore it clean in two, then again, until it was dust between my hands. The clerk didn't stop me. He just nodded, slow, like a man who's seen worse and hopes to see better. When I stepped back outside, the street was half full. Her father was there waiting. "You think you can buy your way out of this?" he said. "I'm not buying anything," I said. "I'm freeing it." He spat at the ground. "You'll regret it, son. She'll ruin you like she ruined me." I walked up close enough that he could see every line time had carved into me. "You ruined yourself the day you sold Grace for greed," I said. "And she's the only thing I've ever known that don't need saving." He stared at me a moment, then turned, climbing into his wagon, muttering curses that the wind carried off before they reached me. I stood there until the dust settled, and then rode home. The whole way back, the sun sat like fire on my neck, but inside I felt something cooling, a peace that came not from victory, but from finally being done. When I reached the ranch, Lila was on the porch waiting. She didn't ask what happened, she just looked at me, eyes searching for something more than words could give. "It's over," I said. "He won't bother us again." She nodded, slow, then took my hand, her thumb brushing the dust from my knuckles. "Thank you," she said, voice steady. "Not for what you did, but for who you chose to be." That night, the stars felt closer than they'd ever been. The air was still, the kind of still that holds its breath for a promise. The children slept sound, safe in rooms that no longer echoed with ghosts. Lila sat beside me on the porch, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. "I used to think freedom meant running," she whispered. But maybe it's just a space to stand still beside someone who sees you right." I turned to her, touched the edge of her hair. "You're not what they called you," I said. "You never were." She smiled, eyes glinting in the lamplight. "And what am I then?" "Mine," I said, barely above a whisper. "We stayed like that till dawn, two shadows stitched together by the slow mercy of morning. When the first light came over the ridge, the land looked new again, washed clean of every name it had ever been called. Morning broke with the kind of light that forgives everything it touches. The air smelled of rain far off, of new grass, of cattle stirring slow. I woke before the house did and stepped out onto the porch. The boards were cooled under my bare feet, the sky pink at the edges, the fields quiet except for the low hum of life returning. For a long time, I just stood there, watching the sun climb over the ridge and spill into the valley, touching each fence post, each blade of grass, until the whole place looked like it had been baptized. Behind me, the door creaked. Lila came out, hair loose, shawl around her shoulders. She leaned beside me on the railing, her shoulder brushing mine. "You're up early," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. "Couldn't rest," I answered. "Didn't want to miss this light." She smiled faintly. "Feels like a clean start." "Maybe it is," I said. "We've earned one." The children woke soon after, the house filling with footsteps, chatter, the rattle of dishes. Eli helped the twins saddle the horses for their morning chores. Mary chased the chickens, laughing loud enough to scare them all under the porch. Sam ran to Lila, tugged her skirt, holding a drawing. Stick figures under a big sun, a house, a man and a woman, 5 children, and above them all, a line written in crooked letters, "Our family." She knelt, kissed his hair. "That's us?" she asked. "That's us," he said. I stood in the doorway, watching, coffee steaming in my hands, the smell of biscuits and bacon filling the room. Lila looked up at me then, and something passed between us. Quiet, certain, like the end of a long ride. All the years of distance, all the storms, all the nights we thought we were alone, they'd led right here. Not to glory, not to some grand salvation, but to the simple grace of belonging. Later, after breakfast, we saddled the wagon to head into town. Miss Abel was expecting us for supplies, and Lila wanted to bring eggs to the preacher's wife. The road shimmered with heat and promise. As we rode, folks along the fences waved. Some smiled cautious, some true. I tipped my hat to all of them. We weren't ghosts anymore. We were part of the living again. In town, the air felt lighter. The same men who once turned their eyes now nodded. A few even offered kind words. The preacher saw us pass and lifted his hand in blessing. Lila thanked him, her voice steady. We bought flour, coffee, and cloth for new clothes for the boys. She picked a spool of red thread and held it up. "For the curtains," she said, "to keep the light from fading." I told her, "Some things don't fade." We left town in the late afternoon, the sun low and wide behind us. On the ridge above the ranch, I reined in the horse and looked down at the house, the smoke rising soft from the chimney, the pasture stretching far and gold, the wind combing through it gentle. Lila followed my gaze. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "Every day," I said, "but I think it's already here." She nodded. "Then let's keep it." When evening came, the children played in the yard till the light thinned. Lila called them in, her voice carrying easy through the warm air. I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. She brought me a cup of coffee and sat beside me. For a while, we didn't speak. The world around us did all the talking. The creak of the porch swing, the hum of crickets, the soft thud of small feet inside. Finally, she said, "I used to dream about what peace looked like. I thought it was a place, but it's just this, isn't it? Someone beside you who doesn't flinch when the wind changes." I said, "And that's all it ever was." The sky went dark except for the stars. So close it seemed I could reach out and touch them. I remembered the man I'd been, the widower who kept his grief alive because he didn't know what else to feed. And I remembered her, the woman traded away like a debt. Somehow, we'd both come through the fire and found something worth keeping. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Tell me," she said, "if you could start over, would you do it all again?" I looked out at the fields, at the faint glow of lamplight through the window, at the shapes of our children moving beyond it. "Every mile," I said, "every mistake, every storm, if it led here." She reached for my hand, fingers threading through mine. Then it was worth it, she whispered. I nodded. It was worth it. The night deepened. The coffee cooled. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The land breathed slow around us. The kind of slow that lasts. And when the wind rose, carrying the scent of rain and sage and something like promise, I heard her voice, soft, certain, alive. Home, she said, and for the first time in my life, I knew she was right.